Charlie Kirk epically takes down a race-baiting college leftist. Guys, this is going to be a good clip. I think you're going to like it. This idea of systemic racism in America as it pertains to black people, and, you know, whites are just holding black people down and oppressing them. They just can't get ahead because whitey's in the way. It is so stupid, and I am so tired of hearing it. And you know what? All the facts are on our side, as Charlie Kirk will demonstrate right here in a moment. So we're going to get right into it, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But first, do me a big favor here. Like our video and share it around so we can keep bringing you guys this great, hard-hitting content. As always, everybody, I'm your host, Darian, and this is Resist the Mainstream.
Hey, Charlie, thanks for coming. I wanted to ask a question about racism. I know you've argued that systemic racism in the U.S. doesn't exist. I wanted to point out some answers I think that's obviously wrong and see what you think about it. So just starting with the issue of crime, we know for a fact, because it's been studied pretty extensively, black people and people who aren't black or white people use drugs, commit nonviolent drug offenses at pretty much the same rates. Black people get arrested for these crimes about 2 to 3 times more often. It's dropping now that we've legalized weed in more and more states, which is a great thing that we've done. Even if you say that police are doing that not on purpose, but because they're just in areas where more violent crime is committed and they're patrolling, isn't that an obvious example of something that black people have to deal with in this country that's much worse off for them than non-black people?
Okay, no, but any other point you want to make about systemic racism? So let me ask you a question. You believe there's systemic racism?
Oh boy.
Just I would say that there's a lot of that black people have to deal with that makes them worse off in the country.
Okay, such as having to be around police all the time?
Yeah, because if you're around police, not because police, but because we have this, I think, law that you're going to get arrested for committing a nonviolent drug crime. So as an extension of that, you're around police more often. You're more likely to be arrested for that crime.
So look, here's the thing. So in 2018, blacks made up 53% of all the homicide offenders in America. No one wants to say it out loud, but blacks commit more crimes than whites and Asians and Hispanics. In fact, there's a disproportionate amount of crime committed by blacks in America. And so therefore, you're going to have a heavier police presence. And so why is that happening? I believe there's a fatherless epidemic happening in America. And I really don't have a soft spot for the argument hey, there's too many police around, therefore I can't deal crack without being interrupted. Not exactly very compelling to me, okay?
What Charlie aptly points out here kind of reminds me of how people will always say that police officers are just, gunning down and executing black people all over the place. We have this epidemic of extreme police brutality in America. It is so not true. And in fact, first of all, if you're more likely to get struck by lightning than being shot by a police as an unarmed black man. Let's just get that out of the way. But aside from that, a black man is far more likely to kill a police officer, white or not, than the other way around. And it's not even close, all right? It's by a factor of over 10. Yet all we hear about is this ham-ringing about, St. George Floyd III, or, whatever his name was, and how, he was just so evilly killed, even though, he obviously, I'm not going to get into it, but, just look into how George Floyd, how his death came about, all right? It might surprise you if you actually do some deep digging instead of believing what the fake news media has duped everybody into thinking.
Okay. Now, secondly, let me say this, though, is that there are issues, if you want to just talk strictly racial, that are disproportionately affecting white America, such as opioids and fentanyl. Not to say that blacks are not affected by this, but it is a disproportionate rural issue. Now, why would that be? Well, white individuals, because of the industrial kind of growth in America, were more likely to get involved in muscular trades in Ohio and Pennsylvania, especially in steel mill towns and such. Therefore, they'd be more likely to get injured at work. So you get likely to get injured at work because of the Sackler family, which you and I could probably agree are a bunch of criminals who should be put in prison for a long period of time. They started to overprescribe Oxycontin, into the communities, and therefore getting these people addicted to the high of an opioid and then searching for other places to go there. So we could play these kind of racial games all the time. Is it fair for someone in Southeast Ohio who's white, who was a son of a steel mill worker, and all these things, that they might have been more exposed to this sort of thing? I think the hyper-racialization of all that is less important than the real, more fundamental question, which is, why does race matter in any of this? And I say it doesn't. I don't like looking at people through a racial lens. If you want to do that, which I said, the statistics are not good at all. In fact, it shows that there's an under-policing problem in black neighborhoods across America. In fact, 50% of homicides go unsolved in Chicago, 50%. because of lack of detectives and lack of police in a lot of these areas. And kind of for your daily thought crime, police prevent crime, and they did prevent crime in New York City. New York City was one of the most dangerous cities in the 1980s and early 1990s, and someone who I think gets unnecessarily mocked and smeared, Rudy Giuliani, became mayor and cleaned up that entire city. And to his credit, liberal Democrat who ran for president, Mike Bloomberg, continued those policies. And so, look, any thoughts on that really quick? Because I want to get...
It just goes to show you what a hoax the whole idea of over-policing of the black community is. Remember, we had the defund police movement, all right? We're talking big, blue, leftist Democrat cities that said, hey, instead of putting more funds towards policing with all these crime issues, we're actually going to do less because somehow that's going to make crime better, which maybe they weren't even arguing that. But anyways, the point is they actually actively neutered the police. They made them worse. They made them less. They made them underfunded. And then they say, oh, over-policing. Yeah, no, definitely not the case. Go to any big city, all right? You can see it in Phoenix. You can see it in Chicago. I'm sure you can see it in many others. You will see tons of signs up saying, now hiring, Phoenix Police Department, Chicago Police Department, insert big city here. Hiring. They need more people and they can't get them. So, no, I don't buy this over-policing shtick at all. It is not happening.
Some other questions, but...
Yeah, I think I wasn't disagreeing at all that police do a lot of great work. The only problem with that is that is a true fact that a factual extension of the fact that police are in certain areas more often means that if society has laws, those laws are going to be enforced more often. I think most people
but I don't think the law against sorry to interrupt, but I don't think a law against dealing crack is a bad law.
Okay, but what about weed?
What about weed? I think
the same applies for weed. You're much more likely to get arrested, and even if this isn't happening as much now, it happened much more often in the past. You're much more likely to get arrested.
So there's been plenty of studies done by Harvard and Maryland showing there was actually an under-policing problem in a lot of these communities. You and I could do statistics all day long because I'm sure that there's plenty that you could cite. But first of all, I'm not a fan of legalizing marijuana. I think it's a really bad idea. But I can probably agree with you that there is a problem with locking people in prison for an extended period of time for using marijuana. But there's another more fundamental question, which is this, which is you can get into sentencing, right, which is usually kind of a talking point, which is that the most important thing when it comes to your likelihood of going to jail if you commit a crime is less about your skin color and more about your wealth and how competent of a counsel you can hire, right? And so, for example, LeBron James, if Bronny gets caught dealing crack, which I don't think he will, he's going to have the best lawyer on the planet representing him that will be filing motions for dismissal, cross-examination of evidence, all sorts of different things. So it's less about race, isn't it? I mean, if Denzel Washington kids or Oprah's God kids did that, it's more about really a wealth problem, right? So then you'd say, well, it's because of racism. Well, no, it's not.
Here's a blatant example that I think Kirk could have mentioned. O.J. Simpson. All right, that guy got away with arguably murder. And, lest you think he didn't, he wrote a book that was called If I Did It. And then he put if and I in very tiny letters. And then I did it in big red letters. And then he writes about how he would have done that killing of those two people who died in that case. Does it get any more obvious than that? I mean, seriously? But, racism. I mean, if O.J. Simpson was black, I mean, he would have gotten double off instead of getting off. Come on, white supremacy.
Blaming wealth inequality between races, which I don't like doing, but if you want to play that game strictly on racism, is a sloppy way to look at things. So the perspective we have is a perspective of Thomas Sowell, which is you look at the whole body of work, you'll see that just because you have disparate outcomes does not mean you could solely blame discrimination. And I'll prove it to you with one data point and then we'll move on, which is this, which is that you can have different data points that have outcomes and there's other factors that play in. So for example, San Francisco and New York are far wealthier than Missoula, Montana and Birmingham, Alabama. Why? Someone would say racism. Well, no, it's not. Mountain towns and inland cities are just less likely to be around commerce and trade. And port cities, by definition, are always wealthier. That has nothing to do with race and everything to do with geography. So what does that example have to do? Sometimes you can have disparate outcomes with data, and attributing racism to it is actually not just imprudent, it's really, really detrimental and harmful. So one thing that I would agree with that we need to do, put fathers back into the home, which is very, very important. In 1965, Marriage rates in the black community were about 80%. Now it's plummeted down to 20 to 25%. There's a lot of reasons for this, subsidizing single motherhood through the Great Society and many other things. But there's other factors that play in. How many words is a child hearing at home? Is the child getting read to on a daily or weekly basis by parents? Those things transcend race. And in fact, the hyperfixation on kind of systemic racism, I think kind of creates a smokescreen that disallows us from actually finding meaningful solution to these problems. So thank you. We got to get to the next question. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in. We hope you liked it. What did you all think? If you agree that this idea of systemic racism pertains to white on black, oppression is a complete hoax, well, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and we'll get more for you guys and we'll see you again soon. God bless.